I will not make any deals with you. I've resigned. I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own. Yes, we are talking about The Prisoner on the drawing room today with a rare dual appearance by Patrick and Kip Carbone. Welcome, gentlemen. It's been a long time, kind of a summer hiatus, I think, if you will, in terms of the last time we were able to get together to do the show. But I'm glad that we're back and ready to rock and roll with something that I think is really interesting. But before we do that, let's just do the usual. Hey, what's everyone been doing? How's everyone been, this summer? Patrick, what's been going on? What have you been playing lately, video game wise? That sort of thing.
I've been playing taiko drum games. I just ordered all of the PSP taiko games off of eBay.
That's right. You had been mentioning that. These are games where you can actually use the taiko drum attachment in gameplay, which I think is kind of cool.
Yep. Obviously not for like the portable ones like Vita and PSP, but for all the other console ones, yeah. And the Switch has multiple taiko games, so I've been enjoying that.
Very nice. And Kip, your summer. How has your summer been in wonderful, rainy Seattle?
It's been not rainy at all. It hasn't rained here in months, actually.
What?
Maybe? Yeah, it hasn't rained at all.
What?
Super dry. Yeah. It's been actually beautiful, like fantastic weather in the 70s. I guess it's Seattle in the summer is fantastic. It's beautiful weather all the time.
Yeah, when I visited, it would have been, the summer of 2016. Yes, that's right. The summer of 2016. Right before I moved to California, I visited Seattle, and I actually found it was sunny. It was nice. It wasn't at all the rainy kind of stereotype that,
No, it's going to get that way in the winter. It's going to be terrible.
Right. So I know that you're, a very busy. Actually, let's help out Kip with this, Patrick. I know that in some of our conversations in the past, Kip is a little bit. We all get this way when it comes to our gaming. We all get into like a gaming rut, and we don't know what to play. Because I know, Kip, that's been something you mentioned. What do I play now?
I started playing the game actually.
You did. What did you start playing?
Several games. I started playing Settlers of Catan with my buddies online on Steam, which is pretty fun. It's
awesome.
technically a video game, technically a board game. And then I started playing what's in Mahootsits, the one where it's all sort of 70s brutalist, and you got powers and you use them.
That sounds like Dishonored. Is that Dishonored?
No. See, this is how in depth. I gotta open up Steam.
Let's see. This would be. Let's see. Senran Kagura. No, just kidding. It's not Senran Kagura.
Lawyer.
Galgun. No, it's not Galgun.
Galgun.
It's not that. It's not that.
It's the one with the RTX rendering and stuff.
Is it Control?
Control.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
That's how in depth and that's how much I'm playing. Yeah, I can't remember what the. It's the one with the swords and the crystals.
That's right. Yeah. Actually, there's a funny inside joke that I got to bring up now when you mentioned swords and crystals. Right. We're always
swords and crystals online.
Yes. When Kip and I are working together, we were always joking that the project we were working on, which is coming out in a week, actually, Aliens Fireteam Elite. Will be coming out on August 24th, and so that's the project Kip and I worked on for years, actually, in California. But we always used to joke that if that project would ever get canceled, would be thrown onto some generic sort of, MMO, from China or whatever, called Swords and Crystals Online. Because like all the MMOs that are like sword and board based, they're always like they're about crystals. They have swords, right? So that was always our like inside joke.
And they're online, yeah.
Yeah, and they're online. Yes. It's sort of like a bog standard MMO product, that might be coming out, from China or Japan or whoever makes those. So anyway, so what I have been doing this summer, other than just chillaxing, which is almost over, by the way. My chillax time is near to an end. Purdue classes start on Monday, and
Dun, dun, dun.
That's right. So another semester. Actually, the third. Can you believe it? The third academic year I'll be beginning.
Has it been 3 years?
Yes, it has been.
Purdue.
It'll be the start of year 3 next week. So that's kind of amazing. Actually, that it's been that long already. Feels like I just started yesterday, and because of how many things they always change on me year to year, it kind of always feels like I'm just starting. But no, as far as my summer activities, it's been a good summer. I played Resident Evil Village, which I thought was really fantastic. I really liked that game a lot. It's not. I'm not going to say it's my favorite Resident Evil ever, but it's upper tier in the Resident Evil experience. So definitely big thumbs up to that. I've been playing Yakuza 7, aka Like a Dragon. I kind of played it a lot at the beginning of the summer and maybe late spring, and then I kind of just let it sit, which happens. Actually, Patrick, I'll blame you. I let it sit mainly because I got addicted to Trails of Cold Steel during that time period, I think.
I gladly accept that blame.
Yes.
Anytime I can supplant something and replace it with Falcom, I'll
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so, I put it aside to play through that game, and then you know how it is when you get through a good chunk of a game, you put it down, and then it's just like it feels like for some reason there's this weird like mental block where to pick it back up feels like the worst thing in the world. It feels like torturous to pick it back up. But I did, and I'm glad I did because I've been playing it quite a lot the last couple weeks, and I'm probably on, I think, the last chapter now. Very good, very interesting turn-based RPG version of Yakuza, although I am glad that they're kind of sticking with the brawling style for the new kind of Judgment offshoot series, right? They had Yakuza Judgment last year, which I also played all the way through. Very good. That one does not use a turn-based RPG thing. It's a brawler, just like all the other ones were. And the sequel to Judgment's coming out in America, I think, in a few months. And that is also going to be a brawler. So it's kind of cool how we're going to allow the old school beat 'em up style to be this, and in the newer games, the mainline games will continue to be this RPG thing. Otherwise, I've made a lot of progress on writing a textbook, which is crazy, a game design textbook. I've made a lot of progress on that, which is good because I'm like under an actual like big boy contract. This isn't like, oh, I'm writing a book and I hope to put it on Kindle. No, like a real publisher made a deal with me, and I have deadlines and all that stuff. So that's been good, and I've made a lot of progress on podcast listeners might remember me talking about Nevada, my own little personal game I started last year. I made a lot of progress on it this summer, and I'm starting to get excited about it again. With personal work, it's always weird. It's kind of like you start it, and it feels amazing to start, and then it like gets hard because like game development is hard in general. When you're doing it like completely by yourself, it's even harder, and you get kind of in the weeds, and then it just gets to be torturous. But then you kind of break through a barrier, and then you're like, hey, I'm making lots of progress. Like literally every time I sit down at my desk, I like do really cool things, I think, and advance the ball farther. And I actually see some light at the end of the tunnel, which the whole thing about Nevada is it's, a detective game, with some RPG mechanics. It's really to prove that I can do something 100% on my own, even if some aspects of it have to suffer, frankly, because it's 100% on my own. It's kind of to prove that out. And then I hope after I finish this, which I hope is a matter of months now at this point. Like I said, I can see the end of the tunnel. I can expand it into, I can do a next project that maybe is just slightly more ambitious, still scoped carefully, but now that I've attained because I've learned a whole lot. It is way different. I'll tell both of you, it is way, way different to work on something on your own than it is to work for even a small developer. Like even when you're talking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people, it's just much different. The processes you have to use are different. It's not the same, and not to go, totally off the rails on this topic, but like I would say the biggest difference is that you have to, when you're working on any kind of a team, even a small team, you can kind of zero in on your specific domain, and you can just like polish that domain up, right? Like in my case, it'd be level design, or whatever. When you're making the whole thing, like if you do that, which is what you're tempted to do, I'm just going to hyper focus on this little nugget, nothing gets done because you have to like advance everything, the UI, the programming, to the extent that you're going to have animation. So you have to, you just have to think differently, and it's been fascinating. All right, so now that we've done our little intro bit here, let's kind of move on here and kind of set the stage for what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the 1967 British television series The Prisoner. So what is The Prisoner? So here's some basic facts. It was starring Patrick McGoohan, who was a huge star in the United Kingdom, thanks to Danger Man, which was known in America as Secret Agent. In fact, I didn't know this, Patrick and Kip. We were talking about earlier in the pre-show chat, the music. I had no idea that the classic song Secret Agent Man, Secret Agent Man,
I love singing it. It's my favorite karaoke song.
Yeah, like I didn't know that song was written for the United States version of Danger Man, which was called
Really?
Secret Agent. Yes, that is
Oh
true.
my God.
Fact check me, fact checkers, but I believe it is true. So, but anyway, Danger Man made Patrick McGoohan a massive star, highest paid actor in the UK at that time. But Patrick McGoohan, and this is what I love about him, he is an auteur. He is a creative force. He is someone with sort of a creative drive, a standards. He's not someone who just pay me and I'll do the thing, right? He has, creative desires, or had creative desires anyway. So what ends up happening is Danger Man, there's actually two different incarnations of it, early 60s, and then it kind of paused, and then spy stuff, thanks to James Bond, blew up, and then they did it again, same star, both starring Patrick McGoohan. He was like, okay, I'm going to stop this. I'm done. And they're like, well, you can't be done. You're a massive star, right? So what do you do then? Well, okay, can we do another show? And it's like, aha, well, I have another show in mind, and that would, of course, be The Prisoner, which is something of Patrick McGoohan's kind of conception. And the premise of the show is deceptively simple. You are, or not you yourself personally, I think of it in video game terms when it's like a character, but the main character of the show is a secret agent forcibly retired. He resigns, but after he resigns from his post, he is forcibly kidnapped and placed into this area called the Village, which is this sort of idyllic English town. Looks very lovely, like a vacation spot, but it's not. It's actually a prison, and he's given a number. He's number 6, and the administrators of this prison desperately want to find out why he resigned from whatever Secret Service, whether it's MI6, MI5. Some people think it's the main character from Danger Man, John Drake, is some speculation that people have, but we don't know that for sure, I think. And so the administrators of the Village want to use every means they can, but they don't want to kill him. They're always like, hey, he's too valuable to kill, so they'll do everything else short of that. Brainwashing, drugs, violence, all this stuff to try to get information from him. And the show is kind of a cat and mouse of the Village administrators trying to get, and including the evil number 2, which changes in every episode. Every episode is a different number 2. Number 2 is the leader, always trying to get information from number 6. And so Patrick and Kip, so we'll start with Patrick. How did you initially learn about this show? When did you first come across it?
I was about 7 years old, and it was on TV.
So it was literally just a show that was on, and you just stumbled across it, like just like any other show.
Yep. It's kind of like, between like watching episodes of Give Me a Break and Different Strokes, The Prisoner, That's how it goes.
That's right. Yeah. Like I was watching Cosby, and then just it was followed up by The Prisoner. Yes.
Yep, pretty much. Yep. So that's how I've known about Patrick McGoohan for a long time, because I was a deep admirer of his from when I watched it way back when.
And so, Kip, how did you learn about The Prisoner? And if it's from us, that's perfectly fine. But how did you learn about the show?
Doing research. I mean, one of the things as like an art director, you're like going through and just figuring out art and how to do it, and like what different themes, and like researching different similar topics. And so something similar that I was researching, like the Prisoner, kind of came up time and time again. It was sort of like going into Jerry Anderson, Jerry, whatever those puppets are, like the Thunderbirds, and they did like Captain Scarlet, and it was like in the 60s British television, and the Casino, the Woody Allen Casino Royale and a bunch of other 60s type shows came up, and The Prisoner was always there. And like I didn't know what it was, didn't know anything about it. I just saw like that, the kind of the dome purple room with that. What is it, the enclosure? It's a famous chair that it's like the black chair that's in the middle, like where number 2 sits.
Right. Yeah.
And then I had no clue what it was, but it had all these like zany, outlandish, mod-looking stuff or like aesthetics to it, and so it always looked cool. And then finally, when I just started, I saw it was on Amazon, I just started watching it from there.
And for me, my initial exposure to the show, actually, it was from, much like Trails of Cold Steel, it was from Patrick, because I had been a huge, and still am a huge, massive mega fan of Columbo. I'm a huge, ridiculous slappy for that show. In fact, it's shocking to me that we didn't do a podcast on that first before we got to this, but that's coming. We should definitely do a Columbo podcast. It's so good. But anyone that loves Columbo knows that Patrick McGoohan is actually a major player in the Columbo series. Like, he is a villain in several episodes. He's also the director of an infamous episode of Columbo, and it's kind of worth mentioning, actually, because it's super weird. And when you think about The Prisoner, you can kind of understand maybe a little bit what's going on. There's an episode of Columbo, it was in the 1970s run. McGoohan is not in it, but he directs it. And because he was friends with Peter Falk, Peter Falk, aka Mr. Columbo himself. And the episode is called Last Salute to the Commodore, and might be For the Commodore. I'm not going to look that up. Don't fact check me. But that's basically what the episode is called, and it is weird. It's one of the weirdest episodes of Columbo that they ever did in the 70s. It's not like some of the reboot Columbo episodes from the late 80s, early to mid 90s. Some of those are just like bad. Like, they're just not good. Like, for instance, what's that one that we watched together, Patrick, drunk one time?
Murder in Malibu.
Yeah, it's not like Murder in Malibu. Murder in Malibu.
That was a great episode. Lots of laughs.
It was a great episode if you're smashed, much like Tommy Wiseau's The Neighbors is only entertaining if you've had a lot to drink. But I wouldn't say that's true of Last Salute to the Commodore. I would say the episode is not bad in that way. It's just really odd, right? I mean, his direction to Peter Falk is odd. There's a scene where he's like shouting his dialogue over top of like machinery to a sailor on a boat, and you could even tell Peter Falk is cracking up, like he's breaking character in that scene. But the episodes where McGoohan is the villain, the Columbo villain, are actually some of the best episodes that they ever did in the 1970s, and he appears in the reboot series a couple of times too, and those are some of the better episodes. So he had a super positive impact on that show, and what ends up happening is you talk to people, and then Patrick, you brought up, oh, that's Patrick McGoohan from The Prisoner, and I'm like, oh, what's The Prisoner, right? So I look into it, because at this point I've watched every episode of Columbo like 20 times, and I have to like find something else to watch, right, at some point. And yes, why don't you watch modern TV, Rob? Well, I do sometimes, but most of it's crap. Not to sound old, but yes.
You can say that again.
Yes, that's right. Get off my lawn. I just really like old TV that's well done. There's just something about it, the vintage elements of it, whatever. But so I wanted to check out The Prisoner, and lo and behold, it was on Amazon, as it still is now, via the imdb.com thing, where there's like ads and such, but it's free. So that's, if you have Amazon Prime. So get Amazon Prime, and it's one of the free with ads shows. So that's how I was initially exposed to The Prisoner. So Patrick, what were your first impressions of the show? Like, both when you watched it as a kid and when you rewatched it now?
Let's see. Well, I don't really quite know how to say what my first impressions were as a kid, because like it's kind of always been there in my life. I've always been aware of it, so yeah, it's kind of like, what are your first impressions of your parents? Well, I don't know. But the other part, though, is since I had seen it so long ago, I had completely forgotten everything about it. So watching watching it again at a slightly older age. Um, wow, I'm trying to think how to describe it because I mean, on the one hand, when the first episode, the setup, it's the kind of setup that could be a very traditional feeling series, but it gets very odd. Like even the acting styles are odd. It's not like even other shows of the era because there's definitely a difference between acting in the 60s and 70s versus acting today. Um, and I'm not going to elaborate on that any further because to do so would probably make one group or the other mad unintentionally. But it doesn't feel like that. It really feels very much kind of like a stage performance in a way, just how they deliver their lines. But the deeper you I went into the series, then that's definitely where it began to feel more surreal. But at first, when I started rewatching, it didn't necessarily feel surreal as much as just a little off kilter.
Right, right. And Kip, what was your impressions of the show initially?
Man, I want to live in his apartment or whatever his house is. It's so cool. I don't know, like it's a weird. It's just, I mean, it's obviously surreal. Like surreal is sort of the. I really like surreal things. Like I'm a huge David Lynch fan. You can't really get too weird for me, and this is pretty. It's weird, but it's grounded in. I think when it's so bizarre, but then it is ground. Like when you find what is grounding, that's when you start to figure out what's going on. Uh, but yeah, it was just kind of bizarre. Like, and I think Patrick McGoohan's what do you like? There's a name for it, but it's like your timbre or your inflection of your voice
Yes, yes.
is super interesting. Like the way he,
Yes,
like
it
the way
is.
he yells at people is like incredible.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's just it is. I mean, it is sort of like a stage production where it is like theater, and I think that's sort of a theme of the show in general because it is like they are trying to. It is all I mean, it is technically staged, and they're making this like this fake reality for him to slip into, and they're constantly trying to screw with his mind and flip him and get information out of him. And yeah, it's just like nothing like you've never really seen before. And I'm sure at the time it must have been mind blowing. Just like, what, my God, what is this? And yeah, I don't know. It's kind of mesmerizing. And I miss not having any episodes to watch now, like at night.
Right, right, yeah.
I did savor every episode I watched, all 16. So
It had a very high good to mediocre episode ratio. Extremely high
Yes.
ratio
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Some shows it's like, every few episodes are really good, most of them are just blah. This show, I think there's a lot of hits, very few misses. My first impression, I think Kip, you were talking about this. I just love the aesthetic so much
yeah,
of the show because it's completely at odds with the thing about any kind of genre fiction is expectations are set, right? Where it's like when you think of prison where a secret agent is locked away, I'm immediately thinking of something like, to use video game terms, like the Combine from Half-Life 2 or something, dark black metal walls, sinister Death Star type stuff. What I don't think of at all is a beautiful English village with tea and breakfast. And let me just comment on the breakfast. Like, the breakfasts in the village are the greatest breakfasts in television history. Okay, like when he sits down to talk to the new number two, the villain, and he or she usually invites number six to breakfast, and it's like the full English breakfast, complete with like these freaking toast holders, which I want desperately for my own house.
Yeah, I guess
right?
I've never seen those toast holders. That must be like a British thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it
But
must
yeah.
be, right, where you actually have, and they're meant for the triangular pieces of toast, right? The idea is that, and that just seems to be like a very English thing, right? It's not that you just like do what I do, which you put a piece of Aunt Millie's low carb bread, cha-ching. They're not actually paying me anything. I just love their bread because it's low carb. And if I put a piece of Aunt Millie's low carb bread in my toaster oven, what I do is I wait for it to get toasted and I just toss it onto one of my kids' like chewed up plastic IKEA plates, right? And that's breakfast. That's not what number 6 does. It is cooked. It is toast made by someone else that's not him. It's cut into triangles in advance and actually put into these little fancy sterling silver toast
Kind of
holders.
silver platter, yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's like if he served bacon, it's again when I make bacon, it's gonna be on some crappy plate that probably has like a chip in it or whatever. When number 6 has bacon, it's like again on this magnificent platter. Like the coffee is served in a carafe that's just the breakfasts are to die for. But the aesthetics of the show are incredible, and the music too. Like okay, I would say the main theme, which is awesome, does have some of the spy motifs. It's got that little twangy guitar in there, right? But the soundtrack in general has it's very sort of happy sounding and very sort of whimsical, but that makes everything seem more sinister. And I'll tell you, as a creator, that's hard to do. That kind of weird juxtaposition. Like if we're trying to make a game, you and I together, Kip, and we're like, okay, we want to make something that's whimsical and fun and looks like a place you'd want to stay for months, but it's actually evil and horrible, and it should be chilling to the bone. Anyone above us would go, that's stupid, don't do it. And if we tried to do it, then everyone would have play test the thing, would be like, actually, this doesn't convey your feelings at all, right? Like it's really hard to do that juxtaposition of things, but it's nailed in this show. Like, yes, it's idyllic, it looks awesome, but the sinister aspects of it do come out. They absolutely do happen. And the production values, that's another thing, one of my first impressions. The production values of the show are extremely good, especially for 1967. It doesn't matter that the sort of automaton enemies, the balloons that attack you, the rovers, that's right. The rovers that attack people that try to leave. Yes, they're balloons, right, on a string. Like, it's so obvious that's what they are. But they look terrifying anyway. Like, right? Like, you buy it, right? You totally buy it. I think so.
They don't explain any of that either, which is nice. Like they don't tell you. It just shows up.
No.
It owns you.
Yeah, it's just like these are the roaming guards that if you try to leave the village, they will catch you and likely kill you. And it's demonstrated, but they never explain how they're made or where they're stored or anything like that. It's just this is the weapon of the village. Accept it.
So right now, this is a good transition, and I'll let you complete that thought. But I just want to say real quick. So up until this point, we haven't had any spoilers. And normally, I'm not a big spoiler person where I'm just like, spoilers ruin. No, actually, I usually feel that if something's good enough, spoilers shouldn't really ruin it. I actually think for The Prisoner, though, if you have not watched it, you've listened to us hype it up for about a half hour, go watch it. Then come back to the podcast and cue it up at about a half hour, because at this point, we're going to go into spoilers now. But anyway, I'm sorry, Patrick, I totally steamrolled you, but since we're starting to talk about the rover and specific elements, I wanted to give that warning, so please continue.
Yeah, well, I was going to loop back to what was being said about the breakfast and the whimsical atmosphere is just really everything about the village on the surface is essentially the highest level of cordiality, essentially all of the rules of what you're supposed to do in polite society and how you're supposed to treat each other. I mean, whenever basically the loop of the show is oftentimes in an episode, number 6, Patrick McGoohan's character is called to the office of number two, whoever happens to be playing number two in that episode, and there's some kind of scheme or plot or even just discussion to try to get information out of number two. But like you said, like he arrives here for what he knows is a discussion he's going to hate, but there's this fantastic breakfast. He's treated very politely, um, and all of that. But it's like as soon as you start to get under the surface of uh, quote unquote getting to know anyone or what finding out what motivates someone, find out that basically everyone there actually hates each other. They just pretend not to hate each other the whole time, but
They're all
everyone.
very British, very, very British.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, like the veneer of niceness, the veneer of cordiality, and everything is a huge part of the sort of atmosphere of the show, and kind of the sinister nature of what's going on. So, the one thing about The Prisoner that I think is really fascinating is the order of the episodes. Now, obviously, there's some episodes where their placement is clear. Like the opening episode is meant to be the first episode, and the last episode is meant to be the last episode. But after that, it's not as clear, which is supposed to be where. And so, what I wanted to ask you both, and fans of The Prisoner actually debate like what order you should watch these in, because it does in some interesting ways change the storyline. Why I gave the spoiler warning again. If you're still here and you haven't watched it, please don't be dumb. Go watch it. I wanted to ask you both what order that you watched it in. I'll go first. I watched the Amazon Prime order, which I think is probably the same as some of the released DVD sets or whatever. And so, Kip, what order did you watch these in?
I just watched it in the Amazon. I had no clue that there was. Well, I guess it seemed weird watching it. Like they seemed discordant, even though the show. I guess this is also I don't think shows had sort of a big story arc up until, I don't know, maybe like The Sopranos, or I mean, I guess some shows did sort of, but it wasn't, like where there's like a big arc throughout the whole series and it comes to an end. So like it seemed out of order, or something was weird with it. But I just watched it in a regular Amazon.
All right, and Patrick, you, I think, did not on purpose. You watched it in a different order, yes?
Yeah. So I don't really know how to describe the order, but basically, since I knew you were watching it in Amazon order, I just found some other recommended order on the internet and watched it. And it was really interesting to do that because by the time I reached the end of the series, I could start to see some of the reasons that different orders were recommended, and they're based on even the smallest details. So I'm going to tell one, but it's not a spoiler though. That's the thing. So if you're watching in the Amazon order, the first episode is about arriving there. The second episode called Chimes of Big Ben. A good episode, but there's a scene in there where number 6 goes to visit number 2. It's time to have I don't recall if it was tea or coffee. I'm just going to say coffee. And number 6 puts 2 sugar cubes in his coffee, and number 2 just freaks out. Like not like super verbally, but his face, you can just tell that he's totally flabbergasted. And if you're just watching in order, you don't really know why. But the order that I watched, that episode came quite a bit later on, and there had been an episode just 2 or 3 episodes prior to that where they were talking about how they had studied number 6 in his life and all of that, and they made special note of yes, and for dietary health reasons, he has given up sugar. He used to have it all the time, but he hasn't had it in years. And so then, a couple episodes later, when I watched Chimes of Big Ben and saw him drop those sugar cubes in there, I freaked out just as number 2 was freaking out because it's like, wait, what is number 6 doing by putting sugar cubes in there? And it seems like the smallest detail, but that's the level of detail that people have gone down to try to figure out what order you should watch these episodes in for it to make for it to have the what they consider the proper impact.
Right, and there's one episode in particular that I think is important in that respect, and that is Many Happy Returns, and the order that happens in. So we're getting into big time mega spoilers now, obviously. So this one in the Amazon order, it happens, I believe. Many Happy Returns is like episode 7 of 17. I believe. I'm not going to fact check myself on that, but it's relatively early. And what makes that really impactful is in Many Happy Returns, he actually ends up back in Britain, back in London. He actually escapes, which is something he's always trying to do in like every single episode, almost every single episode, not every one, but most of them he's trying to escape, and he is usually totally foiled, but occasionally he makes it out. And in Many Happy Returns, he actually does make it out back into London, and it's a really fascinating episode. It literally has like the first like 20 or 30 minutes or something with like no dialogue whatsoever.
That's the one he wakes up and the village is completely abandoned.
Yeah,
right?
it's completely abandoned, right? And so there's no dialogue for like the first.
That one is brilliant. I think that's my favorite episode.
It is a great episode, right? And there's also some Danger Man style action when he fights some people on the boat to get back there. And so what ends up happening in Many Happy Returns is that he talks to his former employers. Hey, like let's we have to hunt down this village. We have to take it out, right? And so they actually send him in an airplane. He's not the pilot, but he's the co-pilot there to sort of on reconnaissance. And all of a sudden, once he finally finds the village, the co-pilot says, "Be seeing you," which is the code. That's what they all say to each other in the village, right? That's, again, I just love how they have these innocuous little things like that, like, "Be seeing you," and they even do a little salute to each other, right? That's kind of how they talk. So the co-pilot says, "Be seeing you," and then he hits the eject thing on number 6's seat, and he gets ejected back into the village. And then it's still abandoned, but as soon as he goes back to his apartment, all of a sudden a marching band strikes up, and then everyone floods back in. And then number 2, who was actually pretending to be the owner of his old apartment back in London, this lady shows up with a birthday cake because it's his birthday. And so on one level, it's a hilarious episode because it's like sort of, hey, for your birthday, we let you hang out in London for a while. Happy birthday, right? I mean, they don't say that, but it's sort of implied. But the reason where that is in the show order matters is at this juncture, number 6 loses all hope of escape and focuses on the destruction of the village instead. So it's a major turn in the story, right? If you place Many Happy Returns early, like it is kind of in the Amazon run, then the show is a lot darker in tone because he loses hope of escape right away, and is bent on destruction of the village. And a lot of the episodes are basically he's not really trying that hard to escape anymore, right? He realizes the only thing he can do is destroy the village itself. If you place Many Happy Returns later, then the tone lightens a little bit, because he has more hope that he can actually escape for real, right? So that is kind of considered a fulcrum of the show, where you place that particular episode. So moving on, though, best episodes, worst episodes. So we like, at least I and Kip and I like Many Happy Returns. So let's just start firing off really good episodes. I'm going to say Many Happy Returns. Patrick, another episode that you really liked a lot.
Oh, what was the one episode where there was that lady who kept trying to kill him?
That is called The Girl Who Was Deaf.
Yes, The Girl Who Was Deaf. That was a fantastic episode. That's one of the best pieces of television I have ever seen.
I like that episode a lot as well, yes.
put that very high up there. The other one that comes to mind is the Schizoid Man.
Also
So
very
those
good.
two are my favorites out of the whole series.
So, just to kind of describe those episodes for the audience, so Schizoid Man is essentially where the village, they decide the way they're going to fool or kind of coerce number 6 into giving information is to make a doppelganger of himself.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep. That's Schizoid Man. And what's brilliant about that episode is it's so good at torturing number 6 that you as the viewer begin to question whether or not you're keeping track, even though they actually do a good job. Like the true number 6 is wearing certain clothes of a certain color. The fake number 6 is wearing, I believe it's the white suit or whatever it is. It's a different color. But and you know, the way they show everything, you know, you really feel confident that you're going to be able to keep track of who's who. But then as the show kind of rolls on, you start to doubt yourself because you're like, well, is there going to be a big twist here? But then the utter and complete victory of number 6 in that episode, where he figures out, you know, kind of what's going on. He gets his identity back. Actually ends up somehow, and I don't understand, maybe Patrick, you can enlighten me, how he tricks the rover into basically murdering the other guy. I don't really know, but it was a cool moment nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, it made sense. I was like, wow, that was really clever. I would have to watch the episode again to tell you, though, because I don't remember exactly how that went about. But I believe that there was some kind of code word that they both knew, and number 6 was the first one to say it. And that's why the rover thought that he was the real one, because of course then the other guy is just going to repeat whatever the first one said.
Right.
I think that, if I recall, that was how he did it.
Right. That makes sense. That has the ring of truth. And by the way, that's another episode where he almost escapes, but is defeated at the end, you know, very narrowly. So that's kind of another cool thing about that. So the other one that you liked, Patrick, which was The Girl Who Was Death, in most people's runs of the show, this appears fairly late, you know, unless I suppose there's some fan orders where it might be early, but at least the ones I've seen, it's fairly late. This one is kind of interesting because it's this absurd story, like of this woman trying to assassinate number 6, except number 6 isn't really even number 6. He is a secret agent in England, and they don't explain this. They're just like, he's in England now. He's on a regular case. It's like a demented episode of Danger Man, right? And this woman keeps trying to kill him in all these various ways, kind of almost like a 1967 PG-rated version of Saw. You know, a lot of, because there's like a lot of devices and everything.
Yeah.
But then it all turns out to be a story Patrick McGoohan is telling kids in the village. That's the setup. That's the whole thing of how that episode is set up. And obviously the village was sort of hoping that he would accidentally reveal something in the telling of that. And so what number 6 does is just makes a completely absurd tale that doesn't enlighten them at all, basically. But that's an awesome episode. Kip, do you have any other favorites that we haven't brought up?
This one is Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. The one where he switches his body with another. They transplant his brain into another dude's body.
Yes.
That one's kind of like it's so over the top, but I think it's good. The acting is pretty good in that one.
Right, and you get to find out that number 6 had a fiance back in London, and that fiance was actually, like, I believe the daughter of his boss or something, if I recall. Yeah. Patrick, you were going to say something, I think.
Oh, no, it's about the other episode. That's fine. We've moved on.
Well, see, now...
what was it?
Now, I'm going to be number 2 now. We want information.
No, it's good. Carry on.
All right, so that's the thing. Now I'm gonna do all these things to Patrick to get that information out now, right? So, any other favorite episodes, Kip? Or no, Patrick, you were gonna say something again.
No, I said it will not work.
Ah.
Your attempts to get information, they will not work.
Because you are not a number. You are a free man. Any other favorite episodes, Kip Carbone?
The Western one isn't bad. That one is like a little.
Uh-oh.
You hate that one?
No, I know Patrick hates it, but please complete your thoughts.
I hate that one.
That was sort of like, I don't know. To me, it was like in the X-Files, every season they had the wacky one, the funny one. That was sort of the funny episode for me of like this. What was that one? Just like whatever the zany episode was every season on the X-Files. That was like just three or four loop. I mean, it was kind of stupid at the end that it was like, oh, they were it was sort of like VR in the 60s and how they tricked him, but it was pretty good. That one, I guess the bad guy in that one is kind of like a sort of a psychopath, and I thought that was a menacing character, an interesting character.
And then didn't he come back in the last episode?
Yeah, he's in the last episode. Yeah,
different character.
Yeah.
That's all. That's like, wait, I think I recognize this guy.
He's a lunatic though. That guy's. I think he's so like weird and menacing. I really like him.
He was good as a villain in that. It was funny though because they do this a lot in The Prisoner, where they'll reuse the same actors as different characters, and it does throw you off, like, because it's like, it's like 2 episodes from the last one, they use him again. They use him in the final episode actually of the show, and making you think they're trying to make some kind of weird connection, but it's not. It's just they just use the same person again, right? For me, some of my favorites, I'll see if there's any that we haven't talked about yet. There's one that I think we haven't brought up that is, I would say, maybe some of the greatest television I've ever seen, and that's Hammer into Anvil. Is an incredible episode. I remember, watching that, and at the end of the episode, which, by the way, every episode ends with that picture of McGoohan with the bars going across, it's just kind of a funny ending. I just thought, wow, this is TV like has never been done before or since. And the reason why I love this episode so much, it's like so many episodes, the new number 2 is trying to get information from from number 6, right? But in this case, number 2 is getting information from another prisoner, a woman, and the woman actually commits suicide as a result of number 2's efforts, and this gets number 6 mad. This riles up his sense of justice. And so in the usual, like, I'm number 2, I'm going to give you the amazing English breakfast with the awesome toast. Number 6 is like, I'm going to get you for that, right? And number 2 is like, I'm going to be a hammer and you're an anvil, and I'm just going to come down on you and I'm going to get all this information. What ends up happening in Hammer and Anvil is number 2 begins slowly but surely doing all these fake things to make it look like there's a conspiracy. And it's all 100% fake. Like, he'll just walk up to someone into a rando person and whisper into their ear, knowing that the cameras will catch it. And it won't actually be anything, right? He does this a whole bunch. He wrote like a secret note that has stuff on it that sounds like it's something, but it's really not. He's just making all this up, and he keeps doing this across the episode to get number 2 more and more paranoid, right? Just, getting him to flip his lid. He finally ends up convincing number 2 that there's this massive conspiracy that includes the most high-ranked people in the village against him, right? And that causes him to crack. And then he's convinced by the end of the episode that number 6 is actually an agent sent by number 1 to basically root him out, right? To basically, get him in trouble. And the brilliant part of the episode is, because of the culture of paranoia that the village has, all number 6 has to do then is say, yeah, you're right, I was sent. And guess what? You failed the test, because if I was someone sent by number one, you should have just done nothing. So you were disobeying orders. I want you to voluntarily resign as number two, and he does. Right? So he completely convinces this number two to resign just on his own actions, right? And it just completely, utterly defeats that particular number two in that episode in the most clear way I think in any other episode a number two is defeated. This guy was completely defeated, and it's just an incredible episode. So clever. It's an episode that's dramatic without having any action, really. Really cool. So now that we've gone on and on about, I mean, there's others. Like I said, it's a really high. I think the opening episode's really good. As far as episodes we don't like, I guess I'll start this. I did think the Western one was weird, but Patrick, I'll let you talk about that. As far as other episodes, the hit rate is so high. I will say the politics one, which I know a lot of people really like, which I believe the politics one is called Free for All. Yes, that one I thought was just kind of slow. It just doesn't, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, and the plot just kind of moved very, very slowly. The actual parts of that episode that do talk about politics, where he's like berating the villagers, basically, number 6 is running for the office of number 2, and he's basically giving a speech in which he's just berating everyone. You're all, dopes for believing all this stuff, and I'm going to find out. And everyone's just like, applauding wildly, and that was amusing. But I thought it was kind of slow moving. Patrick, talk to us a little bit about the Western episode and why you didn't like it.
So from what I understand, the reason that episode exists is because at some point Patrick McGoohan was basically like, what I always wanted to star in a Western. So I think that's why that episode exists, is because Patrick McGoohan just always had that star in one. The interesting thing, though, about The Prisoner is that, especially towards the end of the run, they were looking for more story ideas, and they basically pulled a Nintendo move and let anyone on the crew submit scripts for consideration, no matter who they were. And I'm trying to recall. I feel like it was maybe one of the assistant music producers who turned in the script for the Western one. And there was other people who turned in scripts. I think only like 2 episodes solicited in that way actually got made, and the Western was one of them. So it's just a very interesting story of how that episode even came to exist. Is basically someone had this idea where, well, what if we did The Prisoner in the Wild West? And Patrick McGoohan is like, well, I always wanted to star in a Western. Let's do it. My issue with it, though, is number one, it doesn't really feel much like The Prisoner, because we've talked before about the vibe of the village and how it's the kind of place that you would want to live and everything like that. The Western setting kind of lost that for me. So I didn't think the setting was a good fit for kind of the culture and mythos that the show had set up to that point. But other than that, I just didn't think it was a good Western. I've seen a lot of Westerns that I liked. That just wasn't one of them. And at that point in the series, watch order, knowing that I was approaching the end, it felt very much like an anime filler episode, where it's in there and it's just like, what, did they not finish creating the next episode yet? They needed to buy time. That's how it felt to me.
Right. So Kip, episodes that you didn't like.
Let me see here. I'm looking at the episode list now.
And it's totally okay if you say one that we really liked, right? Like, since you liked the Western one and we just took a big crack on it. So
no, that's fine. I'm offended. No, I don't care at all. don't know. I can't think of any offhand that I
And
was
it's
like,
also
that's a real pooper.
right,
or
and it's
anything.
also okay to be like, no, because as we said before, there's a really high, sort of proportion of hits on this show, so it's totally fine there. So let's talk about now the final 2 episodes of the show here. So because they tie in. In fact, this is the only, I think, set of episodes that do this, where one episode kind of directly goes into the next in a way that you'd kind of expect in a modern show that has a big story arc and all of that. So again, The Prisoner kind of ahead of its time in doing some of those things. And that would be the second to last episode, Once Upon a Time, going into Fallout. All right, so what happens in Once Upon a Time, it's a very challenging episode. A lot of people say it's their favorite episode or the best episode, but it is a very dense episode where number 2, this version of number 2, and they actually bring back an old number 2, which I think is interesting for this. They bring back an old number 2, and they're like, you got to get this information from number 6 now. And it's time to pull out all the stops. So they do this thing called Degree Absolute, where they take him into a room, into this special area, and they basically age regress him, right? He starts out as a baby, like mentally, right? He's still Patrick McGoohan, And here's the thing, like, here's Patrick McGoohan, grown 40-year-old man, acting like a baby, right, as part of this. And it's convincing. It works. You buy it, right? It's really extraordinary. And then it's like he's brought rapidly through his life, and the idea is that he will reveal secrets, the secret of why he resigned, as all of these events unfold. However, the thing about Degree Absolute is the person who loses this contest of wills, the person that's kind of directing the show here, number 2, and the person that they're trying to get secrets from, the person that loses this battle of wills dies as a result of this, right? And like a lot of things on the show, they don't really explain the mechanics of that. They don't have to, okay? And so they're in a battle to the death, basically, on this. And eventually, and here's what I love about this, number 6 does, in fact, say why he resigned. He says that it was a matter of principle, that, that he just wanted peace of mind and wanted to move on with his life. And even though that was the truth, ostensibly, that wasn't good enough. That couldn't possibly be the truth. Like, the powers that be were like, you can't possibly just want to live your own life. That's ridiculous. No, you had to have had some ulterior motive. You had to have sold out your country. And so he even gives the reasons. Number 2 just doesn't accept it. And so what ends up happening is number 2 dies at the end because number 6 outlasts him. Patrick, did you have any thoughts on Once Upon a Time, the second to last episode?
I don't think I have anything additional there. I just, like you said, I just really like that he essentially gives the reason, and it's just a very basic thing, and the villains just essentially don't believe it. And even reading fan sites, they will tell you that we never find out why he resigned, and it's like, no, we kind of did. He was tired of it, basically. But I mean, how it's not presented in any kind of momentous way. It's not the earth-shattering revelation that the villains or the viewers expect. So really, no one believes it. Kind of reminds me of actually that part in Cliffhanger. Stallone finds a whole bunch of stolen money and he burns it, and the villains just refuse to believe that he burned it because it's kind of like, this can't be right. We're sure it's something else.
And so, I think there's real life parallels to this because, think about even the founding of our country, right? Like, people will say now, hundreds of years separated from it, they'll say, it was just some taxes on tea. It couldn't have just been they were mad about taxes on tea. And it couldn't have just been that they valued their individual liberties and freedom and thought it was being stamped out, right? Like there has to be other motive. No, actually, these people back then felt really strongly about individual liberty. And so, yes, attacks on tea mattered. The other things that happened mattered. So you do see that. I guess my point is, you do see that happen in real life where people can have a really sincere reason, but it just doesn't make sense to the other person philosophically. And so it's just like they refuse to compute, right? It's like it doesn't even get processed in their brain. And I think that's true for all of us. I think, when you have a deeply held belief, and the other person that you're talking to does not have that deeply held belief, whatever it is, it's just not going to make sense to them, whatever that is. And I should say, Patrick McGoohan, a very traditional Catholic man, and I think this shows some of these ideas of morality and sort of individuality and its place in the world and everything. This was an interesting, very deep man, right, that made this. Kip, did you have any thoughts on Once Upon a Time, the second to last episode of The Prisoner?
How could I follow that? No. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the episodes I didn't like the ending of the Prisoner very much. It was a little, I don't know. It was a little outlandish for me, I guess. It was
you weren't alone.
There were good parts,
that's for sure.
It definitely, I guess, reading the backstory of the last two episodes, I guess they were a little rushed, and he was under the gun to write them, and it felt a little bit like that for me.
Well, that's
about it.
This would be a good transition to talk about then the final episode, which Once Upon a Time rolls right into, which would be Fallout. So in Fallout, number 6 defeats the number 2, dies, finally gets to meet number 1, or is it number 1? Whatever. And it's okay. So I could go into the bric-a-brac of this episode, right? I can describe it sort of blow by blow, even though, yes, it's been a spoiler warning. And I'm not going to refrain from doing that because of spoilers. I'm going to refrain from doing that because nothing I say here in this podcast is actually going to prepare you for what this final episode is like. Trust me, you're not ready for it. It is weird. It is absolutely, unbelievably mind-bending that this was mainstream television in 1967. What happens in this final episode. And it's not, like usually when people say that, they think it's like violence or lewdness or no, it's none of those things, right? It's just so incredibly avant-garde and bizarro land what happens in this. I will say, learn the song Dem Bones. That's a key, right? that's definitely a key. And so how to make sense of the ending. So it's interesting, Kip, when you talk about not liking maybe the way it ended. Well, the viewing public agreed with you. Supposedly Patrick McGoohan had to go into hiding because people were super upset about this. And remember, folks, only a couple of TV channels back then, basically, right? So if you watch this in America or in Canada or in the UK, this was like the thing that you watched at that time slot. It's not like now where like there's 1,000 different things. No, there was one thing basically to watch. So the entire country was like, what in the world is this, right? Because going back to Once Upon a Time, they wanted satisfying answers. And McGoohan was like, you're not getting them. Patrick, what did you think of the finale, Fallout?
I thought it was pretty fantastic. I mean, it's really hard to talk about anything in it because, again, it would just seem like complete ramblings unless you've seen it, and probably even if you have seen it.
Yes.
I thought it was pretty well done. I can definitely, to what Kip was saying about maybe being rushed, I can definitely see where there are elements like that because some parts of it are just extremely ridiculously heavy-handed, like the whole I'll just say the whole shootout scene, but I love that scene. But at the same time, I can see how they're like, well, can't really think of anything better, so we'll just do this.
Right, and philosophically, what's really fascinating to me is the court, right, or the parliament, or whatever that's supposed to be there, where you have all these people in masks. And notice the dude that leads him into the area, the courtroom or whatever, was one of the main high up guys in the village. He puts on one of the masks, so this is something that he does. And they all, what they're doing is they're basically putting the very idea of revolution on trial, in essence, right? Or defiance on trial itself as a concept, even. And they have basically, on the one hand, they have this young guy. This is the guy that's the villain from the Western, but it's a different character. It's just the same actor. This character is supposed to represent youthful defiance, which they say is basically, powerful and mighty, but brainless because, it's just all emotion, right? All sound and fury. And, as if to prove it, the young guy runs around singing Dem Bones wildly and gins up the whole place. And again, I cannot even begin to describe what this is like to watch this. And then you have number 2, which dies in the previous episode. He's resurrected. And that's, I guess, a thing that they can do. Again, not explained. And they're so matter of fact about it. They're just like, well, obviously we have to resurrect him.
They give him some sort of like infusion or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's some kind of like the doctors go do thing, and it's just kind of he just reappears. And then they actually then gave him a shave and a makeover. Basically, he looks great. But he represents rebellion within authority. So like the type of rebellion where you are in the system and you kind of use the machinations of the system to rebel, and they put that on trial. And number 6 then represents individualism. Kind of, Patrick, you were going to say something.
And that was the best moment. The thing where he's representing individualism, and he actually has a chance to make his case.
Yes, tell us about this. Yes.
And every time he starts to speak, and we as the viewers know from what's been said that he's going to speak essentially about being an individual, the value of individualism, etc., all of that, presumably in contrast to collectivism. Every time he starts to speak, the entire jury starts to repeat what he just said. Where,
yes.
on the one hand, it's just hilarious trolling, and on the other hand, I mean, what? It's just a complete rejection of what he was saying, because whenever he tries to say something as an individual, the entire group collectively. And again, on the surface, the way they say it, it sounds like they're saying it in agreement. Just mimic what he says. And he's like, no, this is not what I'm looking for.
And he gives up and just goes ahead and gives his speech, but you're not allowed as the viewer to hear any of it. It's drowned out completely. And that is Patrick McGoohan, quite intentionally, I think, trolling the audience. Because you want to hear what this dialogue is, and you're not allowed to hear it. So, yeah, I mean, really good stuff there. So a lot of interesting sort of allegorical things. And so what ends up happening is, you reference, Patrick, the gunfight. So eventually he finds number 1, I believe. And number 1 ends up being himself. It ends up being like a copy of himself. And it's revealed in a strange way. He approaches this guy. He pulls off his mask. And then at first it's like a monkey mask, right? And that's like, what? And then he takes off that mask, and then it's himself looking at himself. And then, the kind of evil doppelganger version of himself runs, away. And then that's what kind of precipitates the big gunfight. And in the big gunfight, the resurrected number 2 and the kid, young adult, they escape together. And basically end up in London, even though it was on a bus. Yes,
a
party bus, right? Yeah, that's right. and they're dancing and they're having a merry time. Never mind the fact that it was clearly depicted in previous episodes that the village was quite a long distance from London. In this final episode, they just get in that party bus and are there in like an hour. You know, like...
they drive on. Oh yeah, it's like on an island too, so they somehow make it onto. Well, I guess England is an island, or Great Britain, and somehow they make it back there.
Yeah, they just don't care. They're just like, we're just gonna throw out that bit of plot continuity, and you know, this episode's so weird. You're just gonna be okay with it, right? You're just gonna we're just gonna jam this down your throat, right? And so you know, they end up in London or whatever, and it's kind of interesting. I think the youth ends up kind of thumbing a ride to who knows where, and then the number 2 guy just goes to Parliament. Like, which says something, I think, about the corruption and everything, right? I think that's supposed to be a comment, like, well, he's just going right back into government to do, you know, presumably evil government things. And then as for number 6, what is happening with him is he just gets in his car, and it ends up being exactly like the opening of the show, which kind of augurs this notion of it being cyclical, that there is no true escape. And when you read interviews of Patrick McGoohan, I think the reason for this is his feelings on this were, in this again, his Catholicism and his Christianity coming out. It's like, well, I consider at the end, you know, the real villain is yourself. This would be, of course, the sinful nature. Therefore, that's why when number 6 reveals number 1, it's just, you know, simply himself. And so he's making a comment there about, you know, we're all prisoners to our own you know, sinful natures, basically, and that's essentially what the finale is supposed to, I think, communicate. But holy crap, that was mainstream television, ladies and gentlemen, in 1967.
Oh, so when he, I guess, like when he finally goes back to his house in England or in London, right?
Yeah.
You'll see for a split second there's like I don't know if it's like a limousine or a hearse or whatever. It's in the intro, whatever the guy is that comes to his door and puts the poison gas that knocks him out.
Right.
Drives by. So they're kind of like watching him still, even though he's like back on the streets of London.
Yeah, it's definitely supposed to imply that you know, he's never truly free, right? Like, yeah. It's not supposed to be like on, you know, on the surface level. It's supposed to be, yay, they made it, they escaped. Although it's so bizarre, you don't really feel that, right? I mean, you don't, you know, you're not like, oh, hooray! You're just kind of scratching your head, but it's supposed to leave you a little bit in doubt. And nothing's explained well, which is why people went crazy when this thing ended.
Oh, should we explain what the island is, or like what it's supposed to be?
Well, I mean, I don't know, because what is the island supposed to be, you think?
I think it's supposed to be like where, well, I mean, it's. I looked into it a little bit. I did, you know, just cursory research or whatever on the thing. But I mean, I guess I mean, there's no sides, because I mean, this is like done during the height of the Cold War, right?
Right.
Where there's like Russia, you know, the Soviet Union, and you know, like communism, and then Western countries fighting. But that it's sort of blurred on the island, where there's like you have people from both, and there's no sides to it. But it's just sort of like a retirement home for people that know too much, and they have to stay on this island. And it's like they're like the nice way of keeping them, instead of just like giving them a cyanide capsule or something.
Right. Yeah. And it's because they do this because they want to get more information. If it was just a matter of they know too much, they would probably kill them and have no qualms about it. But in the case, certainly in the case of number 6, it's because he has things inside of him that they want to get. And so they need to keep him alive.
To me, a lot of it was about individualism versus collectivism. But I mean, that's a very surface reading of it, because, like you were talking about when describing the final episode, it doesn't just come to a conclusion that says, "Yay, individualism." That's not what happens there, because, as you said, the villain is himself. But that's not saying that individualism is wrong either. It's basically, I think, getting at a nuance that of how to be an individual while living in a society. What does that really mean, etc. I think it's kind of hitting on that.
Right. Yeah. I think you nailed it there. The overall, obviously, main idea, as you said, as we've spoken a lot of words, but like, you know, individualism versus collectivism is the main theme, right? Like taking away your name, giving yourself a number. You know, you're going to do what we tell you. We're not going to be satisfied with, you know, how you want to live your life. You're going to live your life the way we say it. All these things, definitely a big part of the show. But as you pointed out, McGoohan goes just another layer deeper, especially near the end of the show, where it's still about this idea of individualism, but then it goes even deeper to, like, you know, okay, at the end of the day, like, what is even like evil in people, right? Like, it goes another layer deeper, and you know, I think like a lot of good media, it's not going to spell those things out to you. You're going to have to do a little work, right, to figure out what those things are, and it's left open-ended. Like, it's not going to cram it down. It's not like an episode of The West Wing where it's like, this is the morality we want you to have. You know, it's not like that, right? It's something where it's like you can interpret this within your own framework to some extent. All right, so thank you for listening in on our conversation on The Prisoner. Hopefully it gets you to watch the show. Like I said, you can watch it for free on Amazon with ads. Very good watch, very entertaining. You know, 17 episodes, so, you know, it'll just take you, you know, a few weeks unless you're, you know, one of those binger type of people. So yeah, definitely check it out. So my Twitter is Rojo Games on Twitter, Rojo Games 80 on Instagram, rojogames.com on my long neglected portfolio site. And you can leave us, if you like this episode, a positive review on iTunes and other things. It would really help us out a lot. Please consider doing that. Kip, I know you hate all social media with a passion.
Yes, sir.
So honestly, if you want to ask Kip something, message me and I'll pass it on to him.
You can email me at nervouspixels@gmail.com. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Yes, you can. That's right.
I'll talk to anybody anytime about anything. So
yeah. You're just baffled by Twitter, and look, Twitter is awful most of the time. So I don't really blame you.
I'm not baffled by it. I see what it is, and like I just don't want anything to do with it. So.
Fair play, absolutely fair play. And Patrick, I'm sure that how can people get a hold of you, Patrick?
I'm reachable.
That's right. Basically, what you should do
is not in service.
Is you should just shout, go outside and shout into the ether as loud as you can, Patrick from the drawing room, I have a question. And there's some chance that's above zero that you might be within proximity of him and he'll hear this. I'm not going to say how much above zero, but it might be 0.00000 like 1% above zero. But that's really the method you have to use. That's how I met Patrick. One day I was just like, Patrick! And then you responded and were like, play a JRPG, right? All right, folks. So again, give us a good review if you like the episode, and hopefully we can get our act together and get another episode out a lot faster than we did this one. Maybe we'll do the Columbo episode. Maybe we'll do another Vidya episode. Who knows? But until next time, we'll see you later in the drawing room. Goodbye.